You know, back in the day, back when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s at least, cars back then, they actually meant something. And I would say that they were more than a car. They were actually a part of our culture. They were built with a purpose. They weren't made of this thin material like these new cars today, these tin cans that we drive around. It was thick steel. They were made to be reliable and dependable. They were something we could count on and trust. And I don't know about y'all, but some of my most fond memories from my childhood was made in some of my parents' old vehicles. I remember my dad had an old F100 Ford, had 3 on the tree, manual transmission. Floorboards got so hot it would burn your feet. But man, I loved that truck. Whole family did, because it worked. It was made with the consumer in mind. And this new stuff, it's made with us in mind. And it's made with a purpose. But that purpose has been flipped on its head. The purpose behind cars today is no longer to complement our lives. They are no longer a vehicle that's powered by an engine. They are a permission slip powered by an AI algorithm. And with the induction of this new mandate that requires kill switches to be installed in all new vehicles sold after 2026, all of these new conveniences, quote unquote, these new technologies they're putting in cars, it's all sold to us in the name of safety. But isn't that always the catch? Isn't that the common theme that we see here? Where they put this stuff in these vehicles and they say this is going to complement you by making your life so much safer. And it's going to make everything so much more convenient. But as time goes on, and if history has proven anything, it's that these things do the exact opposite of what they are intended. And if you haven't heard the latest about what's going on with these cars, you might want to strap in, because this is going to be a wild, wild ride. And I'm here to tell you that cars are now becoming something that we can no longer own, because these cars, they're going to own us. And it doesn't matter if you own an old clunker like this, or if you're planning on buying something new. This is going to affect all of us. And at this point, I don't think it's too much of a secret to know that new vehicles are kind of owning us, because think about the cost of them. They're very expensive. How many people can walk into a dealership today and buy a car outright? I mean, new trucks and SUVs, they start out at the very low end at like $45,000. And that's like the very bare bones basic cheapest model you can possibly get. An average price is going to be about 65 grand. And that extends up into $100,000 plus. And just to put that into context and think about that, my house, my 3,000 square foot house that I built in 2009 cost me $109,000 to build. I've got some friends now that own some of these top of the line trucks and SUVs, and they are $86,000, $87,000. And the crazy thing about that is that you would think that if you're paying that much money for a new vehicle, that it's going to last forever, that it's going to be robust, it's going to serve its purpose, and it's going to do everything and more that you could ever possibly want. And it should last you your entire life. The problem though is that every single person that I know that has bought a brand new truck or SUV or new car in general has had some sort of catastrophic failure that has put it in the shop within 30 to 60,000 miles. I'm talking engine failures and transmission failures. Matter of fact, I had a buddy that put his vehicle in the shop not too long ago, and he was telling me that they had stacks of brand new engines and transmissions waiting to go into these brand new vehicles because they were failing that often. It's crazy. I mean, at this point, we'd be better off going back to horse and buggy. And you would think that after 100 plus years of making vehicles, we'd have this figured out, that these vehicles would literally be built to last forever and that all the kinks would be worked out. But the problem is that they don't want us working on these vehicles. They over-engineer everything. They're not made to last. They're made for profit. So they cut corners. They try to squeeze as much horsepower and as much everything as they possibly can out of these vehicles and out of these engines. Instead of it being a V8, they put a 4-cylinder in there, and then they turbocharge it, and they add these crazy fuel systems that require, you know, this really high pressure and all this crazy stuff that is really not necessary. Again, it's over-engineered. Instead of having a truck like my dad's, where it was 3 on the tree and a manual transmission, now you have trucks that are like 12 speeds. The transmissions are way over-engineered. Why do you need all that stuff? I would say that you probably don't. And all this over-engineering, it jacks the price up. And then they run the model of the car for, 3 to 5 years at the most, instead of like my dad's truck and like this truck right here. They ran these things from like 83 to 93. That's 10 years. So because you run a truck that long, that means you have tons of parts that come out during that time, both aftermarket and OEM. They're very easy to work on. And because there's so many sold within that time period, there are a ton of used parts that end up on the market. There are a ton of these trucks and trucks like this that end up in the junkyard. So you have this vast array of parts and vehicles at your disposal for all the DIYers out there, for all the mechanics out there. It just makes things much easier. But when you run a truck for a couple years, you don't have time to even make OEM parts. That's why when these vehicles fail and they go into the dealership has to wait 6 months for a part that costs $3,000, and it's this big just because there's only like 3 on the planet. And because everything about these new vehicles is so expensive, it drives up the cost of insurance. It drives up the cost of taxes and registration. Now all of a sudden you have to have a 5 or a 7 year mortgage on a vehicle because it's so darn expensive. And you think about that, a 5 or 7 year payment plan basically for a vehicle that costs $100,000, that should actually be more like a 30-year mortgage. That's what I had on my house. So you're paying now what would be the normal cost of a house 20 years ago. You're trying to pay that off in 5 to 7 years. Imagine how much that payment's going to be. And of course, because most people can't afford these vehicles, but pretty much everybody has to have a vehicle to work and to get around in America because it's the way things are set up, that means that there are a lot of people that probably don't really qualify for the loans but get them anyway. And those people, they can get loans with interest rates up to 20-some%. That is insane. So imagine how much money you're paying in interest on that vehicle over the course of 5 to 7 years. It's not a good situation. So it's really not hard to see why these vehicles are starting to own us, but it doesn't just stop with the monetary side of things. Ford just filed a series of patents. And this isn't just about Ford because this is happening all over the place with all car manufacturers, but Ford specifically just filed a series of patents that are putting things in these new vehicles that is absolutely insane. I've got a list of these things here. All right, so I'm going to go through a couple of these with you. So one of the ones they filed is a lip reading patent. All right, and I'll put some links to these things in the description, but basically what this does is it monitors the lips of every single passenger in the car so that the car knows what they're saying, even if it can't hear them. That's crazy stuff. That's dystopian stuff. And it does that through these, it's almost like sonar. It's like these wavelengths that it sends out through the car. And then it basically echoes that information back so it can see what you're saying without actually having to see you. Wild. Absolutely wild. So it's listening to everything that's going on in the car. And there's numerous reasons for that, which we're going to talk about. Another patent they filed is in-cabin biometrics. So the idea here is that it monitors your face, it monitors your eyes, it monitors your fingerprints, and even your heartbeat. The reason for this is because if you get into this car, these new 2026 and beyond cars, and it thinks that you're too excited or you're not in a stable, safe state to drive, it will literally lock you out from being able to drive that vehicle. This is not science fiction anymore. This is really happening. And when you think about the implications of that, what happens if your wife's in labor you have to go to the hospital and deliver the baby. Obviously, when you get in the vehicle, you're going to be in a heightened emotional state, but that car is either not going to start or it's not going to allow you to shift into drive. So what do you do then? You deliver the baby in the car? You take your wife back in the house and deliver the baby in the bathtub? I mean, at that point, you probably wish you would have hired a midwife to do all this stuff for you, but you didn't know that your car was going to lock you out because your heart's racing, because your eyes are big, because your hands are shaking. But that's the reality we're facing. Another patent they just filed is a criminal record patent. So when you come out to start your vehicle, that vehicle, using biometrics, runs your data through a database, making sure that you're not a criminal. And it does that in real time every single time that you sit down in that vehicle. And what are the implications of that? Well, Ford is telling us what they're doing. They're saying that this is potentially useful for law enforcement. So that means that law enforcement can commandeer that data and they can use it to fight crime. In other words, they could potentially use that data and use your vehicle against you to potentially charge you for crimes that you may or may not have committed. And another patent that Ford quietly filed in the background is a Ford ad listening patent. So this one here, it listens to everything that's going on in the car and it monitors your conversations so that it can send you targeted ads through all of the amazing electronics that exist in that vehicle, all the big screens that are in there. Because as you know, when you pull up to a gas station and you get out to pump gas, you got gas pumps targeting ads, feeding you ads, because we have to have ads in our lives 24/7. Your phone's constantly doing it. It's listening to you. And now your car is going to be doing the same thing. So it's going to feed you ads based off of what you've talked about during your conversations in that vehicle. I'm sure this probably hits home for you, because if you're like me, you have a conversation with somebody and next thing you know, you open your phone and it's feeding you ads about the thing that you just talked about. Crazy stuff, y'all. Another one is something that they're already doing and they've been doing for a while, and that is Ford Pro Telematics. So what this is monitoring, basically entire vehicle monitoring for their fleet vehicles. And they do this for companies and stuff like that have fleet vehicles that, you know, they have employees driving them around so that they can monitor the driver, they can monitor their facial expressions and what they're doing, where they're going. All this stuff, all this data is pulled from the vehicle and stored in a database. And the only thing they need in order to access that information is a license agreement. That's how they get away with listening to your conversations and targeting ads to you. That's how they're allowing the courts and the police to be able to subpoena that information so that they can fight crime. And, you know, when I think about this, I'm like, you know what? This has to be illegal. There's no way they can just collect all this data without us knowing it, without our consent. But the way they're getting away with this is that when you buy that vehicle and you sign the terms of service, or you accept the terms of service to use all the amazing features in this brand new vehicle, you are signing yourself up for all of this data collection. And it's all being done through AI. And then it's being sent wherever it needs to go. Whoever pays to access that information. And guess who else is paying for licenses to access this information? Insurance companies. Ford is also spelling that out, and they're telling us that that is what they're doing. It is going to insurance companies so that they can set dynamic pricing for insurance rates. So if the AI algorithm or the AI surveillance system or whatever it is in these vehicles sees that you're a distracted driver, it sees that you get in the vehicle and you're operating it in an altered state or a state that it doesn't like, or it sees that you're doing umpteen million different things that it doesn't agree with, your insurance premium suddenly goes up. If it sees that you're being a good little boy and you're following all the rules and doing what you're supposed to do, then maybe your insurance rate goes down. But if you get into an accident and it sees that for whatever reason, maybe you were talking, maybe you're doing something that you weren't supposed to be doing, Maybe you were doing something that it didn't agree with, and it feeds that back to the insurance company. Suddenly the insurance company says, well, based off this information, we are going to deny your claim. We're not going to cover you. That's the stuff we're looking at here. And this is mostly about vehicles, but this doesn't just stop with vehicles, because this dynamic pricing, this is something they're talking about with pretty much everything. Basic shopping, basic goods, necessities, going to the grocery store, going to the supermarket, you name it. Dynamic pricing is something that's on the ballot. It's something that they're trying to introduce. And I would say that it's something that they are introducing through these patents, through all this technology they're putting in our vehicles, and that they're putting into our lives. So the next time somebody says that the AI bubble is going to pop because it's not profitable, this right here is proof. The bubble's never going to pop, because it has never been about money. It's never been about profit. Because imagine how much this information and this data is worth. It is worth way more than any dollar amount that you could ever place on it. That amount of control is absolutely invaluable. And there's a major problem here that goes even further beyond that. And I'm sure a lot of y'all will probably remember this, but back in the mid-2000s, there was an incentive program that was called Cash for Clunkers. And they basically offered people money to trade in their old cars. Old cars like this thing. This is 1984. So what happened there is that a lot of perfectly good running vehicles basically went to the scrapyard, because when these vehicles got turned in, they weren't allowed to resell them. They had to literally blow up the engine and send them off to the scrapyard. So now we're in this position where there are fewer and fewer old, used, broken in vehicles on the road. And we're kind of being forced into this position where we are eventually going to have to resort to buying these new vehicles, because these old things like this, they're fewer and far between. And something else that's happening quietly in the background is that there are now states that have these absolutely insane smog regulations. And there are old vehicles like this now that aren't passing. And when they don't pass, they basically say, you know what? It has to meet these regulations, these requirements, and you are not allowed to drive this vehicle until it does. And in order to meet these regulations, we're going to have to repair your vehicle, and that's going to cost you $2,000 or $4,000. Most people can't afford that. So what they do instead is they say, well, you either pay the money to have this repair done so that it meets our requirements, or we will buy back your vehicle, or you can retire your vehicle, and we'll give you X amount of dollars in credit towards a new one, towards one of these climate-friendly, emission-friendly vehicles. One of these vehicles that has all of this AI infrastructure built in. And that is leading to people being forced into these positions where they almost have to buy one of these new vehicles, because there are fewer of these old things on the road, and the price of these old things is going up. So if you're looking for a business opportunity, I'd get into fixing up these old things, because the market for them right now is very hot. People are now seeing the writing on the wall. They don't want to be involved in all this technology that's being planted into our cars. They just want four wheels and an engine. They just want something that's going to get them from point A to point B. They don't want all this technology and these baked-in subscriptions. I'm one of these people. This old truck I will never sell. I bought this when I was 16 years old for my grandpa, and he bought it brand new. I paid $600 for it. Because it is now considered a classic, taxes are $2 a year. Registration, I have to pay once like every 5 or 7 years, and it's like $20. Insurance is extremely cheap because this truck books for like $600. But if I were to try to sell this thing, I could probably get 12 grand out of it, just because mint trucks and mint cars from this era are only going up in value. These are now investments, and it's not going to be long that these things are going to be worth more than gold. But thinking about this and knowing how things are unfolding, it really makes me wonder how long it's going to be before old trucks like this are made illegal and we are no longer allowed to own these things. How long is it before the emissions and the smog regulations become so strict that none of these things pass, and we're told that we're no longer allowed to drive these things? How long is it before we have to choose between a horse and buggy or one of these brand new vehicles? How long is it before we have to choose between walking or riding a bike or being surveilled? Because right now, the simple way to avoid this is to simply not buy these new vehicles. But I can't help but feel like there's going to be a time in the not so distant future where we have no choice. And I feel like a lot of people right now are probably going to end up buying these vehicles not knowing that they're also buying into all this stuff, that they're buying into a model that no longer allows them to own that vehicle. They're signing themselves up for a subscription. It's not a vehicle anymore. It's literally a subscription. It's a data collecting subscription that you don't own, because all the technology in there is owned by somebody else, and it's all controlled by somebody else, including your data. Therefore, these vehicles, they're going to own us. And the reason I think people are going to unknowingly sign themselves up for this stuff is because society has taught us to value all this materialistic stuff. It has taught us to go after the next newest thing, to trade up and trade in. And all of this information, it's going to be in there, but it's going to be buried in a stack of documents this thick, which is the terms and conditions. And how many people are going to read through all that? Probably not very many. So when they sign on that dotted line and they sign that agreement, they're signing away their rights. So what do we do? I think in situations like this, it pays to be informed. Know what's coming. All this stuff is happening in the background, and they don't want people to know, because they want people to walk in these dealerships and sign those terms and conditions. They want them to sign away their rights. So awareness is key. Now, me personally, I will never own a new vehicle. I'm going to stick with these old clunkers just because I know them like the back of my hand. If something happens, I know how to fix it, and it's not going to cost me a fortune. These old vehicles, they're trying to get rid of them because they've withstood the test of time. They were designed with us, the consumer, in mind. They knew that eventually these things were going to break, and they knew that we'd have to fix them. These new vehicles, that is not the case. They were designed with us in mind, but instead of us being the consumer, we have now become the product. So I would say that if you have one of these old vehicles, hold on to that thing. Cherish it. Drive it till the wheels fall off, then replace the wheels and keep on driving it. Because I truly do believe that in the very near future, these are going to be a very, very valuable asset, and I think they already are. And what do we do if we do actually get to the point where owning these old vehicles becomes illegal, or all the gas is switched to ethanol and you can't run these things? What do we do when we have to choose between driving or not? What do we do when we have to choose between having a vehicle or a horse and buggy? I think that's a great question, but I think that the best action that we can take if it comes to that is to simply hold our ground, push back. Don't allow these people to come in and take what we own. Because even though we have to make reoccurring payments on these things in the form of taxes, we paid our dues. We paid enough. We pay enough in everything else. This is one thing that we should be able to own, especially when it comes to old vehicles that are 20 or 30 years old that have been paid for over and over and over and will continue to be for as long as these things are on the road. But above everything else, I think the most important thing to understand is that they do this stuff and they get away with it because people continue to participate. They rely on us to go in these dealerships and buy them. They rely on us to sign those terms and conditions. They rely on us to sign away our rights. The moment we stop doing that is the moment all of this falls apart. And I know sometimes things can feel kind of bleak and hopeless. Sometimes it feels like the only thing we're doing is losing. But always remember that the only way they win is if we keep participating.